aos nossos Agradecemos especialmente aos nossos patrocinadores Ouro, Stremio e Nexe, e também ao nosso patrocinador Prata, LHH. Eu sou Ana Múcia, atual presidente da ICF Brasil, voluntária, e junto comigo também está aqui a Maria Angélica e a Tereza, que estarão conduzindo aí esse painel. A International Coaching Federation é a maior associação global de coaching, presente em mais de 140 países e conta com mais de 60 mil membros ao redor do mundo. E durante essa semana, a gente vai ter eventos em vários idiomas. E esse evento aqui, ele é um evento que vai acontecer em inglês, mas ele conta com tradução simultânea. Então, a Tereza vai colocar no chat para vocês já as orientações para que vocês possam ouvir a palestra em inglês ou português, de acordo com a preferência de vocês, tá? Esse painel conta com tradução para o português também. Aqui no Brasil, a gente tem uma programação super especial, que também foi dedicada aí a cada um de vocês. Então, para aqueles que ainda não acompanharam toda a programação, a Tereza também vai colocar depois para vocês ali o acesso ao conteúdo da nossa ICW Brasil, tá? Bom, gente, também quero convidar vocês a aproveitar esse momento para convidar vocês para seguirem a ICF nas redes sociais, no LinkedIn, no Instagram da ICF Brasil, também fazerem os seus posts, marcarem a ICF durante esses eventos, tá bom? Como vocês viram, esse evento está sendo gravado, então, para respeitar também os acordos que nós temos com os nossos palestrantes, não é permitido o uso de robôs ou de inteligência artificial para gravação ou transcrição dessa sessão. Uma coisa bacana é que ao final dessa sessão você vai poder solicitar o teu certificado de participação, que é fornecido pela ICF Global. Lá no finalzinho do painel, a Tereza vai compartilhar também no chat um formulário que vai ser disponibilizado para vocês. E nesse formulário você vai ser convidado a avaliar esse evento, deixar o seu depoimento e também, claro, se você quiser postar um vídeo ou deixar ali a tua experiência também na SW, fica à vontade, tá? Também gostaríamos de fazer um anúncio, né? Que durante essa Semana Internacional de Coaching aqui no Brasil, nós estamos lançando um programa de coaching pro bono, e que é um programa em parceria com o Comitê de Responsabilidade Social da ICF com a Ensina Brasil. Nós estamos convidando você, que é coach associado à ICF, para ser voluntário nesse programa. Então, a Ensina Brasil é uma instituição que desenvolve lideranças que atuam como professores em escolas públicas de comunidades vulneráveis por 2 anos, preparando-os para liderar mudanças em diversos setores. E nós, da ICF, então, seremos parceiros da Ensina Brasil, oferecendo esse programa de coaching pro bono. Se você é coach ICF e se interessou em participar, também a gente vai colocar no chat o formulário para que você possa se candidatar à participação, tá bom? Pessoal, hoje nós estamos recebendo a Janet Harvey. Obrigada, Janet, por ter topado estar conosco aqui na ICW. Eu vou passar a palavra para Maria Angélica, que vai fazer aí as honras da casa e receber a Janet nesse dia de hoje. Obrigada a todos que estão aqui presentes também. O microfone tá mutado, Maria Angélica.
Ok, obrigado, Ana. É com um prazer enorme que recebemos Janet aqui no Brasil. A Janet é autora, palestrante, coach, educadora e CEO da Invite Change, líder global em serviços de desenvolvimento humano, né? Ela colocou aqui a Diane tem quase 30 anos, vocês podem ir acompanhando por aqui. Ela tem 12 mil horas de coach. Ela orienta indivíduos, equipes e organizações a liberarem todo o seu potencial por meio da totalidade generativa. Sob sua liderança, a Invite Change firmou parcerias com marcas globais como Amazon, Microsoft e Boeing, promovendo lideranças autênticas e crescimento sustentável. Janet é coach Master Certified pela ICF, ex-presidente global da ICF e líder de pensamento, capacita líderes em todo o mundo a criar locais de trabalhos onde as pessoas prosperam. Para mais informações, visitem o site da invitechange.com. Welcome, Janet. Is
Thank you so much, Maria Angelica, and to the entire ICF Brazil board and all of you as members and any guests who are here as well. My heart is full knowing you are going to do a pro bono initiative. Some of you may also know that I spent 7 years on the foundation board, and it was on my watch, along with my colleagues, that we launched the Ignite initiatives that allow for all chapters to support pro bono coaching in service to the Sustainable Development Goals. To have seen it expand and grow in the way that it is, this is this is why we do the work we do. It may not feel that way one on one, and at the end of a long day, wondering, gosh, I'm tired. And is anybody else out there that cares? And the answer is, of course, yes. All 65,000 of us, and many more, frankly, around the world who know our work makes a difference. Never underestimate just how big the ripple effect is. So thank you. When I was talking with the committee about what to bring for International Coaching Week, which I have done many, many talks over the many, many years, and I just have been thinking a lot about something really important. So much my own corporate career as an executive in financial services is what led me to coaching. I kept experiencing uh, the breakdown that occurs when leaders prioritize effort and activity over the quality of the experience we have the privilege to create with ourselves, our colleagues, our direct reports, our customers. And I think our environment today is asking us to pause for a moment and to consider what is it that humans require to thrive? It's a question I've thought long and hard about the entire time I've been an entrepreneur. As a coach, yes. As an educator, yes. As a leader. And begun to realize that so much of what I learned early in my professional life just no longer applies. So that's the personal story behind Act Purposefully, Upskill to be future ready. I think we're a little out of balance. We're prioritizing doing and activity and effort and speed at the cost of the quality of the human relationship. And these must come back into some relative harmony if we're to be successful in a zero geography, highly technology enabled environment to come. I suspect for many of you that what I will talk about today on the surface will feel familiar and comfortable. Whether you are a leader, you are a coach of leaders, you're on a team that's being led by someone who I'm about to describe, or you are perhaps an educator or an owner of a company and wonder, how do we rise and meet the many challenges? Some of you will know the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I think the words that are now 28 years old, spoken by a general in the US Army, are as alive today as they were then, to rethink, to reimagine how is it that we are more congruent to our values, more aligned and committed to a sense of purpose to do what is good for society. These are big, big questions that are up all over planet Earth. So here's some traits. You might think about this for self and, well, the customers and clients that you work with. Leaders today make fast decisions because they believe they have to move fast. They carry the weight of their team, their mission, their outcomes. They crave space to think, but they don't know where to find it. They coach others to pause, but they rarely do it themselves. And they lead well. And yet at the night, when they turn out the light in their office and they go home to their families, they have a sense that there is a deeper, more authentic way to show up tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow I will do it. If this sounds familiar, then what we're about to explore for the next couple of hours will be exactly for you. So what is the problem? As I see it, and the leaders that I work with on all 6 continents, urgency is not leadership. It's not a strategy. It is a reaction. And it's a reaction to surviving an environment that feels so unfamiliar and disruptive to them. Humans are not meant to live in reaction mode. I'm sure many of you have studied neuroscience and you understand that if we're always in our sympathetic system, we will burn out. And in fact, this is happening. The world is rewarding speed until it burns us out. It used to be that CEOs would stay in role 12 to 14 years. Today, it is 2.5 to 4 years. That one little data point ought to tell you something about how we may have found ourselves in blinders and missed the real opportunity that exists in acting more purposely. We have begun to confuse being in motion with progress, noise with influence, and activity with impact. Just look at TikTok or any of many of you probably enjoy your Instagram reel. And yet that 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 75 seconds is not the same as reflecting for insight and beginning to think beyond the boundary of self to other, from I to we to all of us. This requires a different approach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all the things that you see here. Success fatigue and what the data is telling us. What a new success model looks like as I've been exploring this with leaders that I'm working with. What happens when we stop chasing stature associated with titles and the corner office? We'll look a little bit at the leadership paradox. I will give you some personal reflection time with some of the keys to the new success model, and then you're going to get an opportunity to personalize it with a coaching session. We'll do a pair breakout before we conclude today. Somebody on the team is going to put something in chat for you. It is a document. It is the generative success framework. We will be translating all of these pieces, even though the document is printed in English. I know many of you like to print and take notes, so please feel free to do that. You're also welcome to interrupt me, and you can do that in chat. Juliana will interrupt me and tell me that there's a question, and I will be happy to answer along the way. So imagine us sitting in a big living room together, comfortable, having a conversation rather than seeing this as a presentation. I know that you probably hear that call to action frequently, but you will notice that I will pause to leave you space. And I encourage you to let your voice be in our conversation together rather than only being on receiving mode. For it is the exchange between us that enlivens our experience of being human. You'll see that image in the lower right that is talking about stress. I was quite disturbed to read some data this morning from the American Psychological Association. And the estimate is that 1 in 3 members of the workforce at every level of leadership is today experiencing a mental health disruption. Not all the way to clinical anxiety, but everything from the feeling unable to catch up with oneself all the way to that end of the spectrum. When the Forbes HR Council went out to survey in Q1, HR managers indicate they have increased their budget for mental health in the workplace by 78% for 2025 over last year. And we see that 63% of the workforce is expecting organizations to provide mental health support. That's a big ask. Managers didn't become managers, people leaders didn't become people leaders to provide mental health in the workplace. So maybe even in just this one small set of data I've given you, you can feel how tight the rubber band is. I'm not trained or qualified to do that. And yet it is what my workforce is asking for. How in the world am I going to focus to productivity? Well, for those of you in leadership, even if leadership of self as a coach, you know that that begins internally, not externally. You cannot legislate mental health. It's about creating the conditions, producing a workplace climate, an environment where people feel the attraction, the magnet of the organizational purpose to keep drawing them forward into a shared experience of success as opposed to a competitive individual experience of success. The data to me is really quite compelling, and I know many of you are likely thinking about engagement. You're probably familiar with the Gallup organization, but this breaks my heart to see these numbers continually at 21% actively engaged. Just think about that for a moment. How is that actually applied to you, particularly if you're a leader of a department or as a practitioner and you are your own company, right? Nobody else around. What the data is saying is that our focus of attention as humans in our professional endeavor, 79% of the time, we are not actively engaged. Means we're underperforming to potential. And as coaches, we're in the business of maximizing potential. And yet it's striking how little we recognize the factors that are keeping us from accessing more of our capability and bringing it into whatever our chosen profession is. And you'll notice here, it is particularly fallen for managers. Individual contributors are flat at 18%. Gosh, 82% of the time, we're not bringing our innately creative, resourceful, capable wholeness. That's a great cost to human society. And it's a place, the good news is, that I think coaches can make a huge difference if we will prioritize that harmonizing of the relational with the transactional. This is a clue to what the new success formula is, in my opinion. No matter how brilliant your strategy is, no matter how many hours we grind, no matter how flawlessly we execute, if we are not rooted in our authentic presence, our leadership becomes noise. People follow presence. We know the moment that we have asked for the attention of our boss or of a colleague or of a direct report, and they get distracted and they're off someplace else. We know those moments when they happen. We rarely say anything about it. It tears at the fabric of trust because it's so invisible. And what we know from talking with leaders and their teams is what they trust is clarity and they crave calm. If clarity and calm are not present, they're gone. Now we can offer it, but only if we pause long enough to find it in ourselves first. So perhaps this is the first place to reflect right now. How much of what I have said so far did you let yourself take in? How many times did you find yourself distracted, having to bring your attention back? What did she just say? Is that relevant to me? Of course, this is the process that's natural for humans. It's not that you get distracted. It's whether you have the muscle to bring yourself back, to respect the relationship more than what you perceive might be your duty to do something. This is what we mean by being. It's not a jargon term, and it is essential to be future ready. Great leaders do not react. They take a breath, they pull back so they can figure out how to respond. They pause and they get still and they listen interiorly, and then they lead. They do not rush to decisions. They create space. So the right answers, yes, that is plural on purpose. There are many right answers. And the more that we exercise our capacity to ask before telling, so I can listen to learn, many right answers can emerge. It's not resting only on my shoulders as a leader. So this shift I'm describing here, to act purposely, is for causing transformation in the system to occur. Pausing is not passive. It's a deliberate act. It's strategic and it's potent. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview here of 4 of the 5 elements of Success 2.0. And then I'm going to lead you through a series of individual activities. The first one is presence over pressure. Let's sense into that for a moment. Maybe a leader or a team that you're working with, maybe in your own cadence, the tempo that you establish for yourself. How many hours a day do you think you need to coach? I use the word need on purpose because that is often, if we're in a scarcity mindset, how we hold it. I have to get this many hours in or I won't generate enough revenue. Without pulling back to say, how do I bring my very best self, all of my capacity fully to this partnership with my clients? Being fully engaged with what is right in front of me rather than constantly chasing what's next. Congruence over compliance. This is a tough one because so much of business all around the world has a lot of energy around the rules, the policies, the ethics, and even today, quite a challenge with the moral side of leading. And ultimately, it's a choice we make. Will I only pay attention to someone else's expressed expectation of me? Or will I also add in the importance of honoring and respecting my own values? Will I slow down enough to notice when those have the potential to be in conflict? And will I be courageous enough to say, without congruence between my personal mindset, values, thoughts, beliefs, and the organizational values and purpose, I cannot see that alignment, will I have the courage to challenge what has been asked of me? Because at the end of the day, if we're feeling the need for mental health support, we are not alone. We live inside a system called an organization, which means the leader who is setting those expectations is also influenced by this VUCA environment. It's all too easy to forget. They get paid the big bucks, so they ought to be able to handle it. Remember? Craving calm and clarity. That's true at every level because it's human. It's a human need to be connected. It is a human need to achieve and grow. When those things are an or instead of an and, we are out of congruence. The third is impact over activity. I was actually talking with a leader just yesterday about the difference between influence and impact and how to explain impact in a strategic way to her team. So one way to frame this is that we focus on what creates meaningful change, Meaningful, of course, is in the eye of the beholder. It's not about staying busy. Meaningful change is articulating what will be the difference in the experience for the audience that we're efforting for or on behalf of. In some organizations, that's the general public. In this particular case that I'm thinking about, there is a board that has a fiduciary duty and a duty of care and a governance duty to ensure that the public is protected. That has nothing to do with the surface level of the operational processes and the transactions that are implemented by the association that this board has that duty for on behalf of them so that the general public is protected. I just said about 6 things in those 2 sentences, and the impact is lost on the operational transaction if we don't, as leaders, connect the dots. We do this thing so that the impact on the general public occurs. This is the systemic view for those of you that have studied systemic coaching or think in a systems way naturally. This is the we, going from the we to the all of us. If each time we approach a decision with the question in our mind and in our heart, so that what will happen? So that who will be affected? And in what way will that cause something to be more satisfying, heightening our quality of life, feeling the sense of belonging and inclusion that humans need? Yeah, we're pretty sure Maslow wasn't quite right placing belonging so far up the ladder of the hierarchy of needs. In fact, those of you who are parents know the moment actually that a child is born, the first thing we do after we clean it off a little bit is lay it on the body, the mother and the father. That is an act of belonging, and it is in our DNA as human beings. We have set this up as an or, not an and. And the 4th here, collaboration over control. You know, for a long, long time, coaching managers and leaders in organizations was all about getting good skills at delegation. And I was with about 600 leaders last week in Miami, Florida. We were talking about how do you level up a team? And the idea of delegation really focuses on task, skill, action, planning. These are all valuable. Don't get me wrong. Those are very valuable skills. But then what you hear from managers and leaders is, my team doesn't know how to work. They seem to be resentful when I provide them with opportunities to do something new. They say no, or they say yes, but don't act. There are many more things I could add to the list. So what's the missing element? And the missing element is authority. Do I have the autonomy to use my competency that you hired me for and to take action, exercising my best discernment, my best judgment about what will create the impact that our company purpose or our purpose in this department's goals and objectives are? When leaders fail to clarify authority to act, what they think they see as resistance, what they might actually be experiencing is a lack of clarity and a lack of certainty that if I act, there will not be consequences that I cannot tolerate or handle. We humans, when we're stuck in sympathetic system instead of in our parasympathetic system, we see everything as a risk. That's part of how we survive as humans. That's okay. But leaders who are equipped with this knowledge, or coaches, if you're working with your leaders around overcoming resistance or what they might even call apathy in their workforce, the first place to look is In what way have you authorized your team so they can accept responsibility and fulfill it? That's my definition of accountability. Yep, I will own my own bias about this. That accountability equals accepting responsibility for authority granted. It takes both parties, the one who will fulfill and the one who initiates the opportunity. Both sides have a responsibility to pay attention to what do we mutually define as success. If we're counting how many times something happens without thinking about the quality, we're only going to get half a solution. And as I said a little bit earlier, speed kills. Our human bodies are not meant to process at that pace or at the layers of complexity that modern business is today. It's no wonder that we're finally bringing AI into actualization. It's been around since the 50s, maybe even a little bit earlier at Bell Labs. And today it is accessible in the fingers of every person who has a cell phone, can work with an open AI platform. As that becomes more implemented, things can go even faster because we're not bogged down by having to remember anything other than learning how to ask an open question. That's pretty good. So what are we collaborating on? We're collaborating on what's not yet known. We're collaborating on our imagination that can spawn new ideas, that can look at how things have always been done and recognize it doesn't need to be done that way anymore. If we thought we had trouble with change, we're really going to have trouble with the wholesale transformation that is occurring in business today. Leaders, coaches who work with those leaders, leaders who are coaching their teams, all must begin to learn to pause in a very active way to determine what is the purposeful act: presence, congruence, impact, and collaboration. All right, let me pause there. Juliana, will you see if there's any questions that are bubbling up? I want to be sure that you're getting this content right before you start to do reflection.
Eu estou acompanhando aqui, por enquanto, ainda nenhuma pergunta. Acho que o pessoal
So
está
that
mais
makes me
reflexivo.
curious.
Yes.
My question back then would be, what have you heard that is resonating for what you experience in your own business or in the work that you're doing with your leaders or as a leader in an organization right now? What have you heard that resonates, that feels consistent with what you're experiencing? It looks like Heidi has her hand up.
Thank you, Janet. Let me try also to get on video. No idea how that comes out.
There you are.
So perfect. So I think for me it was like silence, because what you shared was just music to my ears and fully resonated. Being like in the corporate world and a coach, I guess what you are describing here and like counter setting is this, like, here is the shareholder pressure and the profit pressure, and here is what would be the purpose of leadership. And there is a huge polarity and tension that I'm perceiving in various conversations, like leaders either being aware or at least acknowledging that there is something that they are not paying attention to, but also many leaders still so much in let's say, the old red organizations world of hierarchical, whatever, and not thinking about that. And well, being an HR leader, it really depends on the context, how to try to take them along, or meet them where they are, or sometimes, even if it's very hard, wanting to improve the world, turn around and just leave them where they are because they are not at all open to go in any of those directions yet. Looking at like global politics and global economies, etc., I think we have sufficient examples at the moment where we thought, well, aren't we as humankind a little bit further evolved and more purposeful, etc., and leaving that here, knowing it's not supposed to go in any political direction. But I think we see a lot of like leaders out there, where we see exactly what you put in the over part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Heidi. I think you've captured it beautifully. And I think what I know I've personally gone through in the last decade here in the United States, I just shake my head about what apparently others are thinking that is not in my context. And it got me wondering about this question of diversity, diverse points of view, diverse perspectives, and to the question about what do I mean by a pause? If I don't pause and give respect to an idea or a perspective or a bias or a preference or an assumption that someone else is holding, I'm essentially creating my foot on the brakes. We're not going anywhere as long as it has to be an or. My point of view or your point of view. And what I know about human development is it's never an or. And the fact that two ideas that on the surface can appear to be at odds with each other coexist at the same time, means multiple right answers exist at the same time. And I have a responsibility, at least to myself, to get curious about an idea that sits outside of the one that I'm holding on to, because I am not alone. And to the other question here about the impact of the system. Yes, all human beings, as we know it on planet Earth, live inside of this solar system, and we share the air. We share the air, we share the water, we share the land. And we have a notion that it can be partitioned and owned. And yet we constructed that as humans, which means it can be deconstructed. And we can look in history and we can see many cycles of autocrats going to Democrats, going to autocrats, and I mean, back into BC, we can see this. So there is something in the pulse of human society that is always pushing up against something. Where we get into trouble is when we think that's the only thing there is to push up against, rather than could we lean into, could we see the seed of innovation that lives in every single moment of tension? When we're attached to hierarchy, and there are many cultures in the world where deference to a superior is deeply ingrained in the family and translated deeply into the organizational environment. The question is, what is being served from having that structure in place? And at what point does leadership notice it's in the way? This is when we begin to see transformation. And I think one of the great contributions that coaching can make is not so much to convince them or influence them or push them or direct them being the recipient of our services, but rather to create the conditions for them to consider, and what have we caused to happen? What have we caused to happen? The actions taken over the last year on X initiative caused these things to happen. Which of those things are in alignment with what we imagined a year ago when we kicked off that initiative? In what way did we anticipate observing that phenomenon occurring? And if we didn't, wow, What didn't we pay attention to a year ago when we said yes to that $35 million investment that now our shareholders are going, what were they thinking? Now, that's a really big question. It could be a really small question about what we planned in our businesses to go from 8 clients a week to 25 clients a week, and we only got to 10. It's the same dynamic. What can we imagine? What do we commit our energy to? Do we sustain our energy? Do we get the results we want? If we don't, how do we reflect on that and adapt? Hierarchy in a system is traditional. Does traditional produce the things we want? Is it causing what we want to happen? And so my invitation to all of you is to see pause as that moment when we accept responsibility, that we are always part cause or agent of everything in our experience, everything. We can push against, we can say, no, that was somebody else's problem, but it is always going to come back around. How many times do we project a difficulty onto someone else before we have to look in the mirror and go, I've switched companies twice and the same phenomenon is happening. It must be me. And not from a place of inadequacy or in some way, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe an internal resistance to grow and let go of what's comfortable to us, but rather it is staged. We're all moving in a rhythm and a cadence that's right to the internal motivation of us as a unique expression, a unique, authentic presence. This is why leadership is so complicated, because every single member of the workforce is a unique human being. What brings us together? For most people, it's core purpose. There are 3 things when you look at engagement data. My boss used to be the number 1 in my generation. My colleagues was number 2. That's still in number 2. And number 3 was the purpose of the organization, which is now number 1, if you're looking at Gen Z and Alpha. They will not go to work for an organization that's doing something in the world that they perceive as having a negative impact on society. We're already living long enough to see 5 generations working in the same environment. And they have very different motivations. What is the leader to do? If they stay attached to the processes of leading that they learned on their way up to a larger scope and scale, they will find themselves deeply frustrated. So, Rosangela, yes, the belief behind the pause, the belief that resists pause is that if I don't keep step or pace with what the organization is expecting of me, the underlying belief is it's not negotiable. And yet, the coaching I've done with leaders to help them push back, to be courageous, to say, could we look please at the consequence of the speed we just did? I'm going to give you a little short story here. An organization that is headquartered in the Asia Pacific region and has subsidiaries on all the other continents. Huge $35 million project, 7 months to accomplish it. In the first 2 months, the managers from the finance department raised their hand and said, there is a flaw in the business model behind this initiative. This is not going to work. We need to go back to the drawing board. The leader who is responsible for this initiative wouldn't have it, just not listening to it, hanging their star on the success of this 7-month initiative. They got to month 5 and the headquarters CFO pulled the plug. $35 million of sunk cost lost. 28 people lost their job. Everybody else in the organization watched that happen. You can guess what happened to productivity. And ultimately, the idea was a good one. They will reinitiate this project at some point in time, but they need to address the systemic issue. that the ability to raise something that is contradictory or an alternative way, another facet of examining a situation, there must be room to say no. Otherwise, yes has no integrity. That's a wonderful little quip from Fernando Flores. Many of you probably know him well, in his book on building trust. Yes has no integrity if no isn't a right answer. So, Rosangela, if we cannot have a leader pause for a moment to hear something that is different than what they already know, not only might they risk huge financial and workplace engagement risk, but they are also going to miss the opportunity for innovation that lives there. Had those two managers in finance been listened to, they might have been able to do it in 6 months because they would have been on a better track. But we are so biased to thinking that things just need to stay on the timeline without examining what is the impact that we're wanting to create and the many truths for getting there. So simply another example for us to examine this. And there are companies that are starting to recognize that with the complexity that we live in today, many, many layers of complexity and every single decision with less and less that can be known, more and more that requires making some assertions and then checking to see if the assertions are correct, can be supported by the evidence that we're examining. They begin to recognize, oh, there's a few things here we didn't consider in our original decision making. That is a reflection on practice that is generative by definition, that we recognize there's always something more to learn, and that as we learn, it activates our imagination, and then we go and we test, we create something tangible, we experiment, we measure, and we do it all over again until we're ready to have something that feels minimally viable and we produce it. All of that continues. The question is, do we do it blindly, attached to something from a year ago, or in this case, 7 months ago? Or are we available to see and notice when something disruptive comes in as possibly a better approach? Small micro adjustments, adaptive, flexible, fluid. This is the language you see in all of the reports from CEOs about what they need in their organization. So let's, I'm just looking here to see if there are any other questions I didn't quite answer. Right, progress versus motion. Which is similar to impact, about really breaking impact down into the smaller micro elements. One of the things that often comes up in this discussion is, what about KPIs? And I think that key performance indicators are one of the ways in which we make hierarchy work. We think that by establishing a metric that everyone will be able to stay on track with the purpose. But the problem is the metrics that we establish are often very in the rearview mirror and rarely take into account the adjustments necessary because the environment is changing so quickly and has such great complexity in it. So one of the things that's really valuable is to say, what are the work streams that produce those KPIs? What are the capabilities necessary to fulfill that work stream? Who's sitting in those roles today? And in what way are they prepared? And how deep is the bench behind it? These are much bigger generative questions that are not about being in motion, but they are about creating the conditions for progress to occur and ultimately to achieve or fulfill what those KPIs are. So progress and key performance indicators are not the same thing. All right. There's a whole bunch there, so I'm going to leave it there, and let's do a little bit of individual reflection work next. So here's the first one: presence over pressure, seeing the value of pause. So you could look at yesterday was Monday, or you could look at any day last week. You can decide. As you go from getting up in the morning until you went to bed at the end of the day, what were the parts of your day where it felt rushed? Or as you reflect on it, you think to yourself, here, here, and here. For me, yesterday, I was caught in traffic taking my husband to a doctor's appointment, and we did not want to be late for it. And I found myself looking for ways to weave in and out of traffic so that we could get to the office on time. I absolutely felt rushed. And I also know that when I got to the parking garage, it took forever to find a parking space. Ugh. Can you imagine where I was? I was definitely up in my sympathetic system going, oh, we can't be late for this doctor's appointment. And the opportunity for me is to understand what would shift in my experience if I brought my full attention instead to a little slower pace. We might have left a little earlier. I could have checked the traffic cams to figure out how to take a different route that would allowed us to stay out of traffic and have an easygoing pace. All right, simpler to do personally than it is professionally, but I wanted to give you just a really simple example. Now, put that into whatever your business is, whether you're a solo practitioner as a coach or you're inside of an organization. Notice which part of your day feels rushed, and then what might shift in your experience if you brought full attention instead to a slower pace. And I'll just stay quiet for a couple of minutes and let you jot some notes. Don't need to write a book here, just jot yourself some notes. All right, that was 75 seconds. Hopefully everyone has one or two things written down. We're going to build on these, so you can always come back and fill in as we go. All right, congruence over compliance. I think about this as being able to sit in the tension, because more often than not, uh, we go to compliance because it's easy. Somebody's told us what the rules are and what's expected, and we just follow the rules and put our attention someplace else. One of the things that I learned very early on in financial services, that it's worse to have a rule written down that you don't follow than it is to not have a rule at all. And I think about that now and realize that actually that was one way in which I learned adaptability, because not having some rules around things that do require both moral and ethical alignment means you have to pay closer attention. You have to be comfortable seeing when something is not congruent. And in fact, this is how we learned to surveil and identify insider trading. It was through the pattern of what we were watching. Not that you couldn't do it, but that by doing it, you were creating an unfair advantage. It's another example of looking at impact as opposed to the activity, because there's lots of trading activity, but not all of it was fed by somebody having information in advance of others and thereby creating an unfair advantage. So congruence is a much more robust stance. It demands a higher degree of presence. Can't force it. So I want you to identify 3 recent decisions you made. You can do it personally or professionally. It doesn't matter, although you might find higher gain by looking at a professional one. For each decision, identify for yourself, did I make that decision aligned with my values? Or did I make that decision driven by pressure? By my values or by pressure? And you might find it's a ratio. Well, maybe it was 15% my values, but something went crazy and it was by pressure. That would be, I had a value of timeliness to get to the doctor's appointment with my husband, only I didn't leave enough time in front. I had the pressure of something I was trying to finish at my desk before we got in the car and left. And so now I'm not only driven by that pressure, but the pressure of the traffic and the pressure of not wanting to be late. All right. 3 recent decisions, get those down on paper, and then off to the right. It could be either values driven or driven by pressure. More likely, it's a ratio of the 2. All right, let's go to the next one. Impact over activity. And Flavio, your question about the impact of the system around the client on the effectiveness of coaching. This really goes nicely here because more often than not, people are voluntold for coaching or they come to coaching either way because something has had the unintended impact. Activity has occurred, but it didn't produce the result that was either expected or satisfying. And so when we look at the system, we should be asking ourselves the question, what was the influence on my choices of activity that resulted in that impact? That's the first reflection back. And as you move through that to say, what was the basis behind those choices that I made to act in that way that produced a result I didn't like? Goes back another step to what was I believing? What assumptions might I have made about the situation? What evidence supported me to believe that that was the way to go, the direction to take, the cultural norm to abide, only to realize that there was more I was aware of that I discounted and deflected and dismissed. This reflection is what happens in those pause moments. It can be as quick as 60 seconds or as long as 60 minutes, or maybe even a few days because you decide you need to go and get more information. There's no way possible that you could see absolutely everything that was going on in a given situation. But on reflection, we can see the pattern that's in the system. Coaching that has leaders accept responsibility for that quality of reflection will have leaders learn more quickly where they could have intervened and did not, and where the system itself holds habit and routine action in place that no longer fits with the business environment or the context of a particular initiative or group that a group of people are working on. So here, what are the activities that make up the 20% of your effort that creates 80% of your meaningful results? Yes, I'm kind of playing on the data of the Pareto principle for the HR folks out there, but I'm also kind of playing on the engagement data. So if we only have 20% of the workforce actively engaged, extrapolated across the world, as Gallup does, and then that 20% are the only ones who are doing meaningful results. The others are underperforming to potential. Now, you might want to argue that you do more than that, but do a little critical thinking here. Maybe look at the last week and what your scope of role is. What are the activities that make up 20% of your effort that create 80% of your meaningful results? And what do those answers suggest you make important enough to sustain your focus on it? I'm going to give you a full 3 minutes on this one because it's a little trickier to do. One more minute. All right. So we have done 4 of the 5 elements of Success Framework 2.0. And the fifth one we're going to do is a pair coaching. So feel free to go ahead and set up random breakout rooms for pairs. What I want you to do, oh, I didn't do that right. Sorry, we have one more. I thought I had done it. I didn't. One more. Collaboration over control. So go back and reconsider those 3 decisions you identified earlier. And jot down the names. Who are the people that you could have invited into the process instead of carrying it all yourself? With the managers and leaders I work with, it's very often that they'll say to me, my team isn't quite ready yet. My next question is going to be, and if your team's not ready, whose responsibility is that? Well, I know it's mine. And what keeps you from fulfilling that responsibility? All the things I'm carrying on myself. Oh, so we have a little self-fulfilling prophecy going on, eh? You've probably figured out by now I'm a pretty direct coach. And ultimately, until the leader can shift their identity with being the one who carries the weight, the one who saves the day, the one who grits their way through, until they can release that identity in favor of carrying a shared burden with the people they've invested a lot of time, money, and energy to recruit, select, onboard, and train to productivity. My goodness, this is a huge productivity hack. Who could you invite into your process instead of carrying it all yourself? Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to stop share for a moment so I can see those of you that are on camera. You've looked at 4 of the 5. What's bubbling to the surface? We're gonna go into paired coaching, and I really want you now at this moment to anchor the insights that are starting to bubble up for you. And if you want to say it out loud, that's totally fine. Juliana will translate for me, or you can put it into chat, whichever you wish. Presence over pressure, congruence over compliance, impact over activity, collaboration over control. Rosangela, that was a thought going right through from left to right. You care to share what you're thinking about?
What I'm thinking now. The question that impact me, Janet, was, let me see. the impact versus activity. Because nowadays I believe we have difficult to choose what is really important for us as a coach, what is meaningful. And now what is more, what we have more sustainability, you know. We need to, I think we need to integrate all those things.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
It changes the conversation.
Yeah.
That's the shift.
Yes.
That we slowed down enough to change the conversation. Our own habits and preferences and assumptions and biases about what is coaching must also transform with the environment we're meeting now, which is completely different than it was a year ago, let alone pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Yes, we must change the conversation that we're having. Beautiful. It's an integration. That's exactly right. So I understand that we are finishing at the top of the hour, and I had us going till the bottom of the hour, so that's no problem. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I had in mind and encourage you to let this be something you either continue to do on your own or find a partner. Maybe you met somebody this week that you would love to have this conversation with. Legacy is often thought of as something that is in the future, right? After the fact, after you've gone, after you have passed on to whatever is next. In my mind, legacy is active, it's alive, and it's rippling all the time. You are always producing a legacy, and you have an opportunity to do it more purposefully. So 20 minutes, connect with each other, decide who works first. If you were the coach, you're going to practice these first 4 elements of generative success. Then switch and repeat. And this is the question. If your team, that might even be your internal team, if you're a solo practitioner, told the story of your leadership 5 years from now, what would you want them to say? And what you're going for, the qualities and traits of the experience they had of you over that 5-year period, the being of who you are in the moment, no matter what the moment is asking of you. This is the place to become presence, not pressure, impact over activity that is values aligned, congruence with purpose, and having a shared experience, not a solo experience, inclusion, not isolation. Why does it matter? Because we don't grow from pushing harder. We grow when we see clearly enough to choose differently. The world doesn't need faster leaders, it needs wiser ones. And your leadership becomes your legacy. This pause, it's your turning point. And that completes any of my remarks. I'm happy to, we've got a few minutes if there's a follow-on question, and I'll check in chat here. Aw, thank you, Maria. That's sweet. I aim to provide you with something that will be living on, that these are reflection questions for yourself. There are ones that you could bring this entire presentation in your own language, not just Portuguese and English, meaning your authentic expression, to leaders and managers and teams that you're working with, to help them unhook from the unreasonable expectation that they labor under, that nothing is negotiable. For in fact, the environment is changing at a pace that takes our breath away. If we don't slow down and ask, what is the adaptation that is called for now? Then suffering continues. It's an option. Mm. You're very, very, very welcome. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you so much. Very deep. I love it. Every bit of it. So much knowledge, so much wisdom. I discovered you through, I'm connected actually from North Africa, from Morocco.
Ah,
I discovered you through an ICF video on YouTube regarding the certification levels.
mhm.
Remember that video? Thank you so much. This is so
Very,
insightful.
very welcome.
Thank you for sharing such knowledge.
You bet. My pleasure. And hopefully it is launching you into, for all of you, launching you into a week of learning together. This is such we have a generous community. It is borderless. And as a result, we create an energetic field around the world that fulfills hope. Some of you might have seen the World Gallup study at the end of 2024, and hope is at 68% and trust is at 33%. Hope is defined as having an optimism about the future and leaders who can create certainty, even if the certainty is, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. And here's my commitment to staying alert and noticing what is wanted. This is a big transition that's happening, and you are central to it as coaches, as leaders of self, and as leaders of others. And those of you that volunteer in the chapter, again, know my heartfelt thank you to you, for that is what keeps our community vibrant. And thank you. It's been my joy and honor to be with you. Thank you, Annalisa. Thank you, Teresa. And thank you to Juliana, who I'm sure was working very quickly to try to get everything translated.
Obrigada, Janet. Foi muito rica a tua exposição. Aprendemos muito com você nessa sessão de hoje. Foi uma alegria imensa para nós da ICF Brasil te receber na International Coaching Week Brasil. Então, queria registrar o nosso agradecimento, a nossa gratidão pelo conhecimento compartilhado, né, por todo esse conteúdo que com certeza nos fez fazer uma pausa aqui reflexiva para sairmos um pouco aí desse lugar da pressão, da correria e pensarmos um pouco sobre cada um de nós. Maria Angélica, você quer fazer uma palavra final? Teu microfone está mutado.
Ok. Obrigada, ICF, obrigada, Janet, porque sempre é enriquecedor falar com você. A gente aprende sempre e muito.
É verdade. Obrigada, Tereza, também, que esteve no apoio no chat, contribuiu trazendo informações e enriqueceu ainda mais o nosso chat ali com as informações que foram solicitadas. Então, pessoal, acho que encerramos essa sessão com o coração aqui cheio de gratidão pela tua presença, Janet, e também feliz por estarmos partilhando de mais um encontro aqui da ICW Brasil. E continua! Hoje à noite a gente tem mais um evento também, onde a gente vai falar sobre neurodiversidade, então convido todos vocês para estarem conosco logo mais, já às 18h30, tá bom? Obrigada, pessoal. Obrigada, Janet, mais uma vez. Até logo.
Obrigada, Ana. Obrigada, Janet.
Bye bye,
Obrigada,
bye bye.
Tereza.